This is the story of Jomsburg, how we grew from a 4-man rebellion to an organisation of over 1,000 warriors worldwide. But what was the spark of inspiration for our story? Jomsburg was born into a world of reenactment that was very different from the one we know today, a much smaller and darker place. There were 4 guys in a London Viking fighting group: Phil Bertham, Robin Cowley, Rob Taylor, Adrian Lulham. And they weren't very happy with this Viking group. In fact, they were on the point of giving up Vikings altogether. But that's when they sat down and they talked about the saga of the Jomsvikings, the legend from the 10th century of warriors who left their own societies behind and formed their own brotherhood, a brotherhood operating out of a fortress on the Baltic coast known as Jomsburg. That was the point of inspiration. That was the spark. So they formed the Jomsborg Lag, the Fellowship of Jomsburg, and Phil would be the Jarl. These guys were swiftly joined by others: Jeff Clark, Mark Roberts, Alex Webb, and together they formed a flamboyant group of young fighters striking out on their own. And then along comes this young blacksmith called Paul Binns, and he starts making swords for them. So armed with youthful arrogance and superior weaponry, they soon bestrode the UK fighting scene. But they began to realise that the real adventures were to be had across the sea in Europe. So right from the beginning, at the very heart of Jomsborg, was this urge to pick up the sword and travel. But you know, there weren't any other fighting groups in Europe at this time, but we soon began to inspire them. It's like together we were building this new exciting fighting scene, but Phil and Jomsborg were leading the way. So the very first Volin in 1993, Jomsborg was organising the fighting. The first Bora show in Norway in 1994, Jomsborg was there organising the fighting. The first big fighting show in Iceland in 95, Jomsborg was there organising the fighting. Wherever there were adventures to be had, Jomsborg was leading the way. So you'd think from this that we were really thriving, because we were training and inspiring some of the great new fighters and new fighting groups across Europe. But actually, we'd spread ourselves out a bit too thinly, and the core group back in London, the Jomsborg Lag, had dwindled and was actually on the point of collapse. And that was very nearly the end of our story right there. So what saved us? Well, there were some guys who joined in the early to mid-90s. I'm talking about Carl and then later Cannon and Wolf and Bjarne from Denmark. They made a plan, together with Robin, who was on the council, to save the Jomsborg Lag. And that was the next big part in the development of our story. At this time, I'd have kind of lost touch with Jomsborg. I'd moved to Germany and I'd struck out in different directions in the Viking world. But I was always happy if ever I turned up an event and some of my English friends were there. Well, such an event was Odense in the year 2000. One evening after dark, Carl comes up to me and he asks me if I will bear witness to a ceremony they're having in the trees. So I follow him into the trees. I can feel that there are a lot of Vikings around me, but I can't really see because of the darkness. That's when Phil turned up. And then, lined up there, we can see ranks of warriors led by Carl, Bjarne, Wolfie and Robin. Unknown to Phil, these guys had been recruiting new fighters for Jomsburg, and here they were, ready to swear loyalty to Phil as Jarl. We had lags from Skåne, from Denmark and from Poland. And this was the first that Phil knew about it. And that was a rebirth of the Jomsborg Lag, what we called at that time the Army of Jomsborg. So Phil took this new strength and he just ran with it. He travelled around the world meeting people and inspiring people, and wherever he went, new lags would spring up. It was like a kind of wildfire. Some of these little flames would burn out, but others would grow hotter and burn stronger until we have what we've got today. The Jomsvikings first went to Texas in 2004, and from that spark, a Viking lag sprang up and the flame of Jomsborg leapt across to America. So under Dave Kilborn, the Utland Storm was formed. In the tradition of the pioneer spirit, those guys have blazed their own trail. They've done things their way, and now there are strong lags across all of the states, Mexico, Colombia, Chile. Who knows where they're going to go next? With a hearth that will inspire all the other households of Jomsborg. What an amazing adventure to be part of. In Australia, one of the first Jomsvikings, Jeff Clark, formed the Sudheerd lag, and another lag has also sprung up in New Zealand. And these guys are the furthest travelled of all of us and have shown so much commitment, adding their special culture to the mix. Meanwhile, in Italy, there was a huge Viking movement being corralled by Francesco Cincella, and suddenly we had the amazing vigour of Elag Italy, and they burst out into the northern European Viking scene, and the South Storm was born. And now we have the Spanish blood in there as well, Mediterranean fire that's bringing that special heat to the cold north, under the giant oak leadership of their storm commander, Gore. All this time in Poland, the power of the East Storm has been building, forged in the fires of the battles of Wolin, hammered into shape by Igor Gorevich and his men. And they've been joined by lags in other countries, England, France, Canada. And the traditions of the Slavs have developed that heavier fighting style of the East Storm. And the Battle of Wolin, started by that handful of Jomsborg so many years ago, is now the biggest Viking battle in the modern world. And it's become a rite of passage for other parts of Jomsborg to go there and fight alongside the East Storm. In Northern Europe, a different story was unfolding. Mark Becker, a veteran of the Viking fighting scene, drew together all the hard-training Germans and inspired others in Holland, Belgium, Tyrol, France. They're a major force in the Western-style battles, dedicated people, not just to fighting skills, but also to authenticity of gear and their encampments. But always a bristling shield wall, a deadly team that can grind forward the attack in any battle. And then we have the oldest part of Jomsborg, the West Storm, under the figurehead of Carl Edmonds, part of the original inspiration and the growth of Jomsborg. For many years, they've been centred in the heartland of Skåne and Skåne lag, the oldest of the lags outside of London. But now they have new lags adding their strength. Also in Germany, old warriors and household who've held fast over many years, and others who are bringing in fresh blood and new energy. The family of the West Storm at the heart of Jomsborg holds strong. But there came a point in 2012 where we nearly lost all of this. Suddenly Phil, our Jarl, grew sick and he died. The whole of Jomsborg, in fact most of the modern Viking world, were just left reeling with shock. Phil had been such a gigantic influence in the growth of the modern Viking scene, and for Jomsborg, as our Jarl, our unifying force, when he was suddenly gone like that, it felt like we could just collapse. That was the point where I felt I had to step up and meet the challenge. I have such a respect for the spirit of Jomsborg that I didn't want to let that all just go. So the Jomsviking Council and 30 Jomsvikings all agreed that I would be the next Jarl. Well, one of the first tasks I had to do was organise a memorial for Phil. Now, we'd had Viking weddings before, but no one had done a Viking funeral, and that's what we needed in effect. So, with the support of the council, we invited people from all over the Viking world to come to a memorial for Phil in Wolin. We raised a great boat burning and we burnt gifts in the boat, there were shields around, and people came from all over the world. And then we raised a runestone, and it just showed then and there that the spirit of Jomsborg was still burning strong. But there came another test for the spirit of Jomsborg 4 years later, and that was our 30th anniversary event, the Great Gathering. 500 people turned up for that from all over the world. It was an incredible event. We had fighting games, craft workshops, lectures. It was an amazing meeting of cultures. I can remember sitting round the fire in the longhouse with 40 different steersmen from Lags from all over the world there with me, and the storm leaders. And it wasn't just that so many people had come out and turned up. It was the amount of work that went into that event. It was a hell of an undertaking. I remember our fire ceremony. As the sun was going down, the moon was rising over the Borg of Starregard, and we had a circle of 500 people. 500 people touched that banner. 500 people put their wood on the fire. 500 people put in all their spirit and passion to the fire of Jomsborg. Of all the things I've witnessed in my Viking life over the years, nothing matches that. So, we're in the 35th year of our history, and I'm stepping down as Jarl. It's been 10 years in the job, and what a ride. It's been amazing. I've been to so many countries, and you have honoured me. But you know, the storms have grown in strength. You've all grown in strength. What's going to happen to Jomsborg now? It's up to you, just like it's always been. It's your Jomsborg. You know, we take our inspiration from the 10th century, but what we're feeling is the best in the 21st. Remember what we stand for: community, support. We stand together, what we call Brotherhood. And of course, that includes all the women in our organisation. Most of all, we fight. You need to leave those computer screens behind and get out on the battlefield. You need to know what it feels like when the storm is raging, there's mud everywhere, and you stand shoulder to shoulder with the rest of Jomsborg and you push forward. That is at the heart of Jomsborg. Thank the gods, we also have the hearth, the people who bring us together, the people who make things. And remember where we came from. Those 4 guys in London were thinking about leaving Vikings altogether. But then they didn't back down, they stood together and they went forward. Now it's up to you. Follow your passion, travel to the different parts of Jomsborg, and you will be feeding the flame. And that way, the fire of Jomsborg will keep burning.